Welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be focusing on simplifying expressions by combining like terms. We're going to show that mastery in class by scoring at least a 70% on an exit ticket. Hopefully you have the note sheet in front of you. If you don't, take out a sheet of paper and we'll get you a fresh note sheet tomorrow. Now, when it comes to combining like terms, the biggest thing here is the definition of what a like term is. It is terms that they must have the same variable, which is a letter, raised to the same power. And that's important because sometimes you'll see problems where they have the same variables, but they're raised to different powers. They're not like terms if they don't have that same power. Now, as far as our answers go, they must be in alphabetical and decreasing order. And by decreasing, this is our powers. They must be in decreasing order. Now, just a little note, if the problem contains fractions, your answer must be in a fraction form. We do not want decimals. And I put in there to remind you how to do it in the calculator. You're going to have your decimal, math, and then hit number 1, frac. Now, the big thing when it comes to combining like terms, please do not try and do these problems in your head. Please make sure to either use shapes or different colors to help you to see what the like terms are. Now, I'm going to use the highlighter on the board for it. You can use stars and circles and squares and underline if you want as well. But if I look at my following expression, I have an x term here. I need to look for terms that have not only an x, but it needs to just be an x to the first power. Well, if I look, I have a positive 4x here. And make sure, if you're using a highlighter or if you're boxing it, make sure you include the sign that is in front of it, because that's important. That tells us whether it's a positive or negative number and whether we're adding or subtracting it. And that makes all the difference in our problems. If I look at my next term, this is my constant. There's no variable in it. So I have a constant of plus 1. Well, if I look for other constants that don't have variables, at the very end, I have positive 4. Last but not least, I have x squared, and that is my only x squared term, but I'm going to highlight it just so you can see the different colors. Now, if I combined yellow with yellow, this first x here doesn't have a number. Well, that's assumed that there's a 1 there, because 1 times any number is that number, so we don't have to put it. So now, when we do this, this becomes 1x plus 4x, which gives me 5x. My greens are plus 1 and plus 4, which gives me positive 5, and then I'm going to put x squared on the bottom because there's nothing to combine with it. But remember back to the beginning, I said it has to be in alphabetical and decreasing power order. Now, alphabetical is easy because they're both x's, but decreasing power, here I have a power of 2. If there's no power here, it's assumed to be a power of 1. Well, if I need to be in decreasing order, that means x squared needs to come first, then my positive 5x, and last but not least, my constant of 5. And constants will always go at the end because they don't have any letters. They don't have any variables, which means they're not raised to any specific power. If we look at our second example, a little bit longer equation, but that's all right. We're still going to simplify by combining like terms. So I'm going to start with my x. So I need to look for terms that only have an x to the first power. Well, the next one says yx. It does have that x, but it also has a y, so that can't be the same letter. Well, I have a negative 8x, and then I also have a positive 2x. So we're going to highlight all 3 of them together. They all have that same variable with the same power. My next one, we have positive yx. That means I need a y and an x and both of them to the first power. If I look at my third term, negative 6xy, even though the variables are switched around, they're both the same variables and they're both to the same power. So that is still a like term. It's okay that the variables are switched. In the end, we know we want it in alphabetical, so we can switch it back. We have a positive 7y. Well, if I look to my very last term, I have a positive 2y. So now from here, I want to combine my colors. So if I start with my blue, again, we're assuming that there's a 1 there, and we're going to put it to remind ourselves. We have 1x minus 8x plus 2x. Well, that gives me negative 5x. If I do my greens, I have positive, and again, I'm going to put a 1 to remind myself it goes there, 1yx minus 6xy, so that's going to become negative 5, and if I do alphabetical order, it is xy. And last but not least, I have positive 7y plus 2y gives me positive 9y. Now, if we look at our answers, again, we want them in alphabetical and decreasing order. They're in alphabetical because x comes before y. However, we're going to switch our first two terms. It's going to become negative 5xy. This y is to the first power, and if there is no y in the other term, that means it's to the 0 power if we don't have it. So that y to the first power needs to come first. If we look at our third example, now we've got some fractions, and that's okay. You may not have a calculator at home to use. That's fine. You'll have them in class, and you'll always have that option. But we're still going to start by combining our like terms. So if I look at my first term, it's 4/3 x. Well, there's no other x's in the problem, so I have nothing to combine it with. But then if I look at my other three terms, none of them have variables, so they are all my constants. So I'm going to combine all three of them together. Now, at this point, this is when I would turn to the calculator and type it in. 5/3 minus 23/8 minus 15/8. When you do, we're going to bring down my yellow, because there was nothing else to combine it with. And we're going to get a decimal out, so we're going to hit math frac, and in this case, we're going to end up with 37/12. Now, if we look, there's only one variable, so that needs to come first, and our constant needs to come last, since there's no variables and we want alphabetical order. So, this is my final answer. Again, keep in mind, we want improper fractions in simplest form. It's okay that they have different denominators because they are the correct answer, and we want to be as accurate and in simplest form as possible. Now, our last problem. Again, we want to simplify it. We have some like terms, so we're going to start by combining them. Here I have a negative n. Well, if I look for another n as my variable, I have a positive n. My next term is negative 15/4, and that's my constant. So if I look for any other constants, well, I have negative 7/3. Everything's highlighted, so now let's start by combining. I'm going to start by putting a 1 in front of my variable since there's no coefficient there to remind myself. Well, if I look, I have negative 1n plus 1n. Well, that equals 0n. But instead of writing 0n, I'm not going to write anything because 0 times any number, no matter the number, is always 0. So now those two cancel each other out. So now I'm left with combining negative 15/4 and negative 7/3, which again, we're going to turn to our calculator use and make sure we get the fraction in simplest form. And it becomes negative 73/12. This is my final answer, even though it is just one term, it is just the constant. That is your final answer because my variables cancel each other out. And it's okay for terms to cancel each other out. Please bring your notes and any questions you have to class tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you then.